do we get rid of that box, the waiting room box? Oh, it's quite dark in my place. Ah.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our Binus Films first academic series. Hopefully we will run the program regularly. And this is for the first time we organize academic series. The event is held by Film Department at Binus or Bina Nusantara University in Jakarta, Indonesia. And of course, all of you can watch it live streaming at YouTube at Binus Film channel. So here we only have like 300 participants, but those who cannot join the Zoom, you can also watch in YouTube, in Binus Film YouTube channel. And it is recording now, so it will stay there. So today, we will discuss about rethinking Southeast Asian cinema studies. And because I'm very happy to welcome the new book. It's called Southeast Asia on Screen, From Independence to Financial Crisis, from 1945 to 1998, edited by Gaik, Cheng, Khoo, Thomas Barker, and Mary Ainsley, and published by Amsterdam University Press this year, 2020. And of course, as you already read, you will get 40% discount if you buy it at aup.nl with the code number. I think see on screen or something. Okay. Today I'm so happy and honored to have three important guests in the field. I will try to read the short bio. First of all, is Dr. Gaik, Cheng, Khoo. Hello, Gaik.
Hi. Hi, Ekky.
Correct me if I'm wrong, yeah, but because I put all together your information about you. So she is one of the editors of the book, and she is an associate professor at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia campus. And previously, Gaik lectured in gender, cultural studies, and Southeast Asian cinema at NU, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Asia Research Institute in Singapore. She researches cinema and independent filmmaking in Malaysia, cosmopolitan spaces, including public eating places like kopitiam and mama stalls. I'm already hungry. Race, religion, and the politics of identity and multiculturalism. Her publication include Malaysia's New Ethnoscape and Ways of Belonging in 2015 and Reclaiming Adat Contemporary Malaysian Film and Literature in 2006. And she is also co-founder of ASIAC, Association for Southeast Asian Cinema Conference, since 2004. Okay. I've been to ASIAC when it was held in Singapore and Vietnam.
2012.
Okay. Probably, hey, could you please show the book? Because I have
sure.
I got my copies. Yeah, that's the book, and I'm very honored and happy, and because I'm part of this book. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The second one is also the contributor of the book is Dr. David Hanan, Pak Hanan, Pak David. Yeah. Hello, Pak David. Currently an honorary fellow at the Asia Institute, University of Melbourne. After teaching literature at Monash and Melbourne universities and taking a postgraduate diploma in film studies at University College London, Dr. Hanan established film studies courses in the Department of Visual Arts at Monash. He pioneered the film studies program at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia from 1978. He has researched Indonesian film at Cinematheque Indonesia since 1983 and has published widely on Indonesian films. He has been involved in film preservation projects, working jointly with Cinematheque Indonesia, has done translation for subtitles of about 15 Indonesian films. I think it's including Ada Apa Dengan Cinta, if I'm not mistaken. And for more than a decade, distributed Indonesian films on DVD from a website at Monash University. His book, Cultural Specificity in Indonesian Film, Diversity in Unity, has recently been released by Palgrave Macmillan. It was released
Nice.
last year, yeah? It was last year. So have you met one of the great directors from the 80s or 90s, Pak David?
From
like Sumanjaya or Teguh Karya?
I knew Teguh Karya very well. You know, one could call at his home, usually on a Friday at 5 in the afternoon and chat with him. He was a very open person, and very gentle and very supportive of people that he thought he could help. I met Imanjaya only once when I went to his home to discuss the possibility of Monash University and the National Library of Australia doing preservation work on the single surviving materials of his great film Artheus Kapir. And I would have talked to him for an hour. And we did do preservation work on that film. And so there's a second negative of the film now made and a number of prints. Schumann died about 6 months later, mid-1985. So I didn't get a chance to meet him again, though I do know his daughter, Jana, who's a very clever person, and her films are well worth watching.
Okay, thank you, Pak David. And last but not least, I will introduce you. Is it safe? I say doctor now, Patrick, Dr. Patrick Campos. Congratulations, yeah, I just heard the news. Assistant Professor at the University of the Philippines Film Institute. He is co-author of Communication and Media Theories and author of From Cave to Cloud in 2016. And The End of National Cinema, Filipino Film at the Turn of the Century. Is it already published or?
Yes, 2016.
Okay, 2016, all right. So I need to update my...
It came out in 2016.
2016, okay. And he is currently director of the Office of Research of the UP College of Mass Communication and member of Cinema Committee of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts of the Philippines. And you also managing the journal, right? Plaridel?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. So if you want to submit Scopus Index journal, try Plaridel because I've been invited to be a guest editor about exploitation Indonesian cinema. Thank you, Patrick, for that. Okay. I will now read the rundown. So first we will have a talk show for 30 minutes. I will ask each of you on several important topics as about Southeast Asia. And then after that, Gaik I will discuss with Gaik about the book, because she is the co-editor, as well as the general issues on Southeast Asian cinema studies. And then Pak David will have his presentation, and then continued by Patrick. And then after that, we can have a Q&A with the audience at Zoom, as well as in YouTube. So if you watch in YouTube, please drop comments or question, and I will deliver it to the speakers. Okay. Okay. Before that, let me show you the table of content. So just want to know the taste, the big picture, or what is inside the book, and who wrote what, like, because Pak David and Patrick are also contributors, as well as me. I just help Thomas Barker, the main author, to discuss about comparison between Filipino and Indonesian classic exploitation films. Okay. Right. Okay, let's go up. Yeah. This is the introduction, I think, by Gaik. Yeah. You can download it at the aup.nl. It can be downloaded, the introduction as well as the table of content. Probably next, Irwanto. Next for the table of content. Okay. And they have three section. The first one is about independence and post-World War II filmmaking, nation building, modernity, and golden eras. And section 2 is about key directors, including Pak David and Mas Gaston article, 2 authors in the Indonesian cinema of the 70s and 90s, Imanjaya and Tugu Karya. And then section 3 is about the popular, including Thomas and my articles. And then I'm still trying to find
Another page, actually.
Patrick, another page. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
And Patrick is section 2 about locating
Yes.
Mike De Leon in Philippine cinema. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Pak Irwanto. So, okay, let's talk about, first of all, about the importance of Southeast Asian cinema and why we still need more discourses on Southeast Asian cinema, because compared to South Asia or East Asia, I think Southeast Asia is not that, happening. I'm just wondering, is it true, or if yes, if so, why the discourses on Southeast Asia as other region in Asia, probably starting from Gaik.
Oh, hi, Ekky. Sorry, it was breaking up just now. I think that the reason we don't hear so much about Southeast Asian cinema is because we're dwarfed by cinema from the Indian subcontinent, mainly Bollywood and Hollywood, and not just Bollywood, but also the kinds of more art cinema films that have come out from the 50s onwards. And then also, of course, cinema from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Japan. And I think much of this has to do with the fact that the film departments are in the US as well as, in the West, and then also in in Europe. So when you look at where Southeast Asian cinema falls in your world cinema book, it's very hard to find us. And you can see how Asian cinema gradually got a part in world cinema through these sort of film movements that happened, in the 50s when Kurosawa was discovered, when Satyajit Ray in India, and then progressively Korea, Japan, etc. So because we are 10 countries and we are all so different from one another, we tend to get lost. And in some of these book collections, you'll see too that it's called East Asian or Asian cinema, and actually Southeast Asia is not included a lot of times, or just as a token, maybe there'll be one piece. Yeah, so it's hard to find us, and that's why it's important to have a book that is about Southeast Asian cinema on screen. Southeast Asia on screen. Yeah, but to get back to the a larger question about why we have this book, because there are lots of books on national cinemas, right? Indonesian cinema, Philippine cinema, Patrick's book, David's book. It's also because we noticed that, Thomas, Mary, and I, we were teaching a Southeast Asian film class together. And we noticed, even though, I would teach Malaysia, Singapore, Mary would teach Thai, and Thomas would teach Indonesia, that gradually there were some trends, converging trends, and there were some themes, that each of these countries also face certain similar events. And so I thought it would be a great idea to do the book, though of course it did take quite a few years in the making. And that it's also very important to go back to this time between the end of World War II and the financial crisis in 1998, because how all of us came together and met in the Association of Southeast Asian Cinemas conference for the last 11 times or more, is because of what happened in the 90s, right? After Reformasi, suddenly the sort of filmmaking started to go crazy again, and a lot of it had to do with digital technology. So a lot of the books that have come out since then has been because of digital and the new filmmakers that are making waves in the festivals in Europe and whatnot. So I felt like this period from the 50s, 40s until the late 90s have been neglected. And that's why I thought it'd be really nice to try and capture what was going on in the book. Yeah.
Thank you, Gaik. Pak David, what do you think about this? The importance and the lack of Southeast Asian cinema discourses.
Yes. Well, I agree with everything that Gaik has actually said. For me, I first started teaching Southeast Asian film in 1985 when we got delivery of the first Imanjaya film. We actually did, Monash University and the National Library of Australia funded the preservation of 3 Indonesian films on 16mm. And the first one was Si Mamat by Schumann. The second one was Auteurs, and the third was Nyi Ronggeng. And I was able then, from 85 on, to put different Indonesian films in a range of courses that I was teaching. But this was still relatively limited. And there were no books published on the area. All you could do was provide background reading and give as good a lecture as you could. Then with SBS television, I was then asked by them to see what Indonesian films were available and were worth obtaining. And so we started to bring in some interesting films such as Teguh Karya's Bitter Kopi, Secangkir Kopi Pahit, which is an amazing film and one of the greatest films made in Indonesia. and a range of other films, including Rora Mendut, a fine film by Ami Priona, which I discussed. I use as a key example at certain points in my book, Cultural Specificity in Indonesian Film. But even Krishna Sen's book, Indonesian Cinema, Framing the New Order, which came out in 1994. Well, it only came out in 1994. And it was after that that I actually started teaching a course called Film in Southeast Asia. And we concentrated on Indonesia, but we had managed to get films from Thailand. I actually met with Chatri Chalermukol in Bangkok, and he supplied us with his films on DVD, and some of his films are very, very interesting films. And we actually had a copy of Insiang by Broca. We'd had that since the early 80s because it had been shown on SBS TV. But for me, and for people who were contacting me in the 90s, the big problem was the lack of materials that you could show to students. And I still think that the range of materials that you can show to students is small. I think with the development of streaming on the internet, it's much wider than it ever possibly could be in the 80s and 90s. But on the other hand, some of these older films are very hard to get.
Yeah.
For that reason, I set up a distribution centre at Monash, and we distributed 17 Southeast Asian films,
17.
Including 2 Thai films. And that ran for about 10 years. But at a certain point, the university was no longer interested in supporting it. But the reason I did that was because I was constantly getting requests from people around the world to give them unauthorized copies of material that I had actually managed to get from Jakarta. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I think there is a big question of accessibility, and I'd be interested to know what people who are teaching and want to teach film in Southeast Asia, what they're able to access from the pre-2000 era. And I will just do a little bit of advertising here, though not with any exact clear outcome. We actually have up to 40 copies of half a dozen films on PAL DVD in somebody's garage in Melbourne, which Monash didn't want to store any longer. And we had some remaining funds, and I, from our sales, and we'd sent back tens of thousands of dollars to Jakarta because we sold $80,000 worth of films, that people might want to obtain them sometime when things become. Do people still use DVD? That's really the question that I'm asking, so people can answer that question later on.
Yeah.
The other thing is that this is the second point I want to make, and that will be enough, I think. Up until only recently, most of the people writing on film in Southeast Asia were not trained in film studies, and even you could say had a limited interest in the films themselves. And Krishna Sen, who did very intrepid work with her first book and with subsequent work, she had very little training in film studies. What she got was from me, and it was not formally done. It was done as I was an associate supervisor. And she came from politics. Her book is based on a politics PhD in which she was really looking at censorship, state ideology, state control, and the position of women within that context, etc., etc. But the books don't look at the films in any kind of detail. And I think that's continued a lot of the time. And Krishna's had enormous influence. And that part of that influence has been very good, but also it's also resulted in people thinking the main thing they have to do is to talk about the political context of a film rather than going and looking at the film itself. And for me, and this is why I've always been interested in cinema, films are rich in their semiotics, and I'm interested in looking at what these filmmakers are saying. And in fact, my book, Cultural Specificity in Indonesian Film, is a friend who teaches, I think, Indonesian at the University of Melbourne, read the whole of it, which is nice to hear. He said, oh, what you're trying to do is not just talk about Indonesian films, but trying to explain what Indonesia is like by talking about films by the best filmmakers. I said, thank you. That's what I really wanted to do. So there is a need, and this is now happening. People like Gaik and Ekky do have training in film, and they are interested in the film text rather than simply making points about the political context in which these films are, people attempt to make these films and attempt to distribute them. But that's enough for me on this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak David. I think you are right about the accessibility. I think that's an important issue. We will get back to this issue later. And I think you're also right, like we need to have more like semiotics or formalism approach rather than only political. But I think that's the art of Southeast Asian cinema or Indonesian cinema, because when I did my PhD, one of my my legs was in Indonesian studies or area studies, meaning like political, cultural, and economy and so on. And one of my other legs was in the film studies and media studies. So it's like meaning two words collide for me, because when I did the conference on film studies, nobody knows about Indonesian or South Asian cinema. But when I did a conference in film in area studies, only one or two people talking about cinema, something like that. So it's like a bit of but I call it the art of Southeast Asian cinema or public cinema in general. Okay, probably about national cinema, but it's not about national cinema as well. It's also about formalism, semiotic, and so on. Okay, now let's move to Patrick. What do you think about this?
So I just like to address that bit about why Southeast Asian cinema is sort of coming in late as a discipline or as a field of study from a conceptual angle, right? So it's really very difficult to speak of Southeast Asia as a unified geography or concept or culture, right? So we're very diverse, as Gaik had pointed out. We have different religions, we have different languages, like hundreds of languages. We have varied political backgrounds. And so it's really difficult to speak of Southeast Asian cinema. But at the same time, as has been pointed out, since the coming of digital technology, in a way, Southeast Asian cinema's time has come. It's really a great moment to speak about what Southeast Asian cinema is, because suddenly we could see what it is. Access is part of it, productivity is another, and a lot of national cinemas that had previously been sort of lagging or maybe even dormant, right? So that were maybe very much productive prior to certain periods, like 1975, for example. But we see that they're sort of catching up, and in a way, it is only this moment where we can really think about a Southeast Asian cinema. Whereas previously, the intersection had been very there were key intersections, I think, distributing films across borderlines, but really thinking of Southeast Asian cinema as coming together is quite new. I'd say quite new. And so even though the way we look back to history is really just happening now because this is our time now. And what I'd like to also kind of rejoinder to what David was saying, that the reason also I think why people tend to speak of the politics behind the films or as context of the films is that's really one reason why some cinemas have had a hard time becoming productive. The politics is really a key aspect to this. Censorship, for example, repressive states, and in a way, it's productive of what Southeast Asian cinema is. Of course, it's not everything, but especially for smaller cinemas where censorship is really very strong. The way they circumvent censorship, for example, is indicative and productive of their actual cinema. So we may have been late in coming in a way, but I think it's a very exciting time for Southeast Asian cinema.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I'm keeping thinking about what Pak David said about accessibility because last semester I was teaching Southeast Asian cinema and pop culture, but of course the material are very hard to find. So I'm wondering, there was a OTT like streaming services called Hook, HOOQ, but
Yeah.
it's gone now. It's no longer there. But there, surprisingly, I found like Darna from the Philippines and then Broca and many other important films from Malaysia and so on. Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. But now my next question will be, where can we find the films from Southeast Asia? Is there any, can you suggest the audience, is there any like streaming services like movie or, Netflix is the most popular one, but I think most of everybody already subscribe for Netflix, but for specifically Southeast Asian cinema, during this pandemic era, where we can go physically to the cinematheque or where can we find the materials? And Pak David already said about there's no more DVD, because DVD I think is one of the most is the easiest form. You just get there from the Philippines or from any other country, but now the DVD business is already gone as well. So do you have any suggestion or recommendation where, like during this pandemic?
Yeah.
Go
Gaik.
There's stuff on YouTube for sure, and also maybe iFlix. Though iFlix has sometimes got too many advertisements in between, but I think yes, because right now we're teaching a film class, and next semester as well, we have to digitalize the DVDs that we've bought and make them accessible to the students who are stuck at home. So that's one thing. And I think there've been some really nice sort of digitally remastered copy of In Xiang. Which I truly appreciate our students do as well. But I think we should also think about archiving and making sure that we don't just rely on these platforms, because they are still very much corporate sites, and we don't know how long they're going to be there. So places like the Asia Film Archive, in Singapore, they have been collecting, and for filmmakers, they should try and donate them or give them to the Asian Film Archive to kind of keep. And they are also every year, I think they work with Italian to restore an Italian Institute for Film Restoration or something, and they pick a film to restore. Likewise, I think the Japan Foundation, they're also doing that now. They were asking around for which P. Ramlee or which Malay films to kind of restore. So yeah, at the same time that we rely on these corporate platforms, we should also think about the public good and public access and how we should not have to pay. And maybe Patrick can say a little bit about what's happened with ABS CBN.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, well, that's kind of a tangent, but yeah, so the ABS-CBN is the biggest network, broadcast network, and also it produces films and other things, but it's also one of the main champions of restoration and preservation of films. It's restored a lot of really great films, but very recently our president sort of, or our government in general, no, sort of harassed this huge company and closed it down. So, so restoration, preservation by ABS-CBN has halted. I was also going to add, Gaik already mentioned it in her first two answers, right? So iFlix is one, but I also am very surprised to find a lot of films on YouTube, really. I mean, just under our noses. I find it to be equivalent to our maybe pirated DVDs in the early 2000s. There are a lot of them on YouTube, it's really surprising because if you're not looking, you won't find them. But if you look hard enough, you will find a lot. Maybe the most difficult part about it is that you'll find a lot of films without subtitles. So I've come across a lot of films, old and new, from Southeast Asia. Then the next thing that I have to do is find someone whom I'll bother to ask about translating certain parts. But it's amazing, and it's the same. I think this kind of cultural economy of like piracy, and of course it's illegitimate, and at any moment they will disappear. But it's surprising what you will find in formal platforms.
Yeah, because I think sometimes I felt guilty because it's not the official version, but in a way I need to to think like this is for education only, not non-commercial. So I think it's okay to show the students.
Yeah. But also, I mean, the question of legitimate copies, sometimes they're really very hard to get by. One, because the legitimate copies are really not available. Copyright owners are not around. I mean, so really you rely on collections of people, and sometimes they've uploaded it. So we're all happy.
Yeah. I mean, to talk about translation or subtitling, I think Paul Roche is in the audience, and this is the University of Hawaii, where they do have foreign language students studying Indonesian, Thai, etc., etc. So I know that in the past they've done things with subtitling, perhaps, of films. So I hope that you do something about this, and maybe Patrick can talk to Paul in University of Hawaii.
Yeah, good. Hello, Paul. I
taking notes.
we met in Honolulu, with Gaik and Paul in 2011. Okay. Next question will be finding commonalities among the various national cinemas, but not only commonalities, but also, there were so many collaboration, co-production, and then, so what do you think about this finding commonalities? Probably starting from Gaik or
Sure. It's there's a lot of commonality. I think one of the things that came up is, I mean, right now, if you can see, in the Philippines and in Thailand, okay, Malaysia is also a bit crazy, but Malaysia's small is peanuts compared to the Philippines and Thailand. What's happening on the streets in Thailand today? There's a history to that, and you see that happening in the 70s when a dictator decided to come back, and the students, this is the 70s we're talking about, early 70s, the students protested. They managed to get rid of the dictator. Actually, there were two of them. And then there was a kind of flowering period and for 2 years. And after that, there was a crackdown, the massacre, student massacre at Thammasat University. And this is a period that today, with Anocha's film, makes reference again to that period, but in a kind of indirect way by talking about memory and stuff like that. But that's a period that in a way has come back to haunt us, just as history always does that with trauma, 1965 in Indonesia, etc., etc. So you see that these resonances keep coming back in the Philippines as well, where history plays a big role in the work of Lav Diaz today. But it was also there. But I think what I was also interested in looking at is how, and we've talked about this in one of the Southeast Asian film conferences in the past, is how despite martial law, that filmmakers can still make films. And a good example, of course, is the Philippines, but also in Thailand, as we've seen from 2004, where they still make great commercial films, but now they're getting more and more daring. And in the past, if the films were much more oblique to get past censors, they are much more overt now if you watch the short films. So I think there are a lot of resonances around martial law and censorship and what we can learn from each other in terms of daring and styles, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gaik. Pak David, do you want to have something to say about this issue, commonalities? And
what I wanted to say about this is covered in my presentation.
Okay.
I'll leave it there. And I might say I've spent so much time thinking about Indonesian cinema in the last 6 or 8 years that I've to some extent lost contact with areas that I was looking at regularly, like Thai cinema.
Okay. Yeah, for the audience, Pak David and Patrick will have their own short presentation, probably after this last question. Patrick, do you want to add something regarding the commonalities and the collaboration, co-production, the interconnection?
Yeah, just a bit. I mentioned earlier that maybe the post-war period we've had some sort of crossing paths. We have yet to do a lot of research on films we've distributed to each other's countries. We've had some collaborations, in particular Philippines and Malaysia, or Malaya have had a lot of co-production. Ramon Estela and Lamberto Avellana. I think there's really much to sort of unpack or dig up and understand how they were able to do that. And I mentioned that because also today there is really some sort of synergy as well. Maybe there will be a number of co-productions, but there's also a lot of exchanges. A lot of our younger filmmakers are collaborating, working together. You know, they meet each other in labs. And then the next thing we know, one is the cinematographer of one film in that country. And that's a great thing because in a way it has a history, but we have really yet to sort of shed light on that history as the present is also unfolding in that direction.
Okay, thank you. So if I told everybody that Patrick and Pak David will have their own presentation, but before we get there, I will have a discussion about the book with Gaik, yeah, because we haven't had chance earlier about the book. So I'm wondering who started the idea of this edit collection, and because you and Mary and Thomas, right, working as directors, editors, sorry.
Either way.
Who started the idea and why history and why this particular time range? Okay.
It was my idea, and believe me, I was kicking myself throughout because it's a lot of work. It was my idea because I had been teaching this course a lot longer than Thomas and Mary. I basically started teaching a course on Southeast Asian cinema when I was already teaching in Australia at the Australian National University. So I basically brought the course with me. Then, so that means I kind of knew a little about all the different countries' national cinemas. Some I know much better than others. So I over the years, I could see that, as I grew more familiar with the different national industries, I felt that there was actually a lot in common and that it would be good to actually have them all in a book. So that's why.
Okay, thank you. And could you please tell us a bit about ASIAC, Association for Southeast Asian Conference, started in 2004, because now it's growing and
So I'm just going to share a picture
Okay.
of the posters from the
wow.
Here, the posters from the conference. So when I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Asia Research Institute in Singapore, NUS, in 2004, they had just started out like a year before that. So they were flush with money, and they would encourage the postdocs to have a conference, to organize a conference. So I decided, at that time, I think it was like very gung-ho, and the conference was, the theme of the conference, or the title of the conference was from no budget to like low budget to no budget, or something like this. Because it was about, people who made films, whether they had money or not. Yeah. And that time they were not open to having a call for papers. So I had to actually look up online to find people who were writing on Southeast Asian cinema, and it was very difficult to find those people. I think I had Anchali, who is a Thai film critic. I had, a mixture of sort of film critics and scholars, or people who were just starting out, people who were doing their PhD. So Sophie Siddiqui, who also contributed to a chapter to the book. I had Rolando Tolentino, who already has is already had his degree and was already teaching. I think the plenary speaker was Nick Diocampo, who's a film historian and filmmaker as well. So yeah, and then and May Adado Inawanit, who works on Thai cinema. So at that point, it was still, a lot of us were just doing our PhDs, and I invited Lav Diaz, but he couldn't come. So he recommended I invite a film critic. Or that time he wasn't even a film critic. Yeah, he was just a film writer, and that was Alexis Joseko. And also Tan Chui Mui. And I think it's very important to say, to name these people. Tan Chui Mui is a filmmaker who was at that time still junior to Amir Muhammad and James Lee. And also Tan Bi Tiam, who then went on to start up the Asian Film Archive, which, has just grown and grown today. And Alexis Joseko, who went on to start up a website that focuses specifically on Southeast Asian cinema called Criticine, before he was basically, killed. And Tan Chui Mui is important because she has subsequently continued to do the Southeast Asian collecting of Southeast Asian people and networking with filmmakers, film producers, editors throughout the region. So she's now doing from Ta Huang Pictures, and she's now the director of Sea Shorts, the Southeast Asian Short Film Festival that has been running since 2017. So this is another chance for short films from Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Burma, various places to be shown in Malaysia. But I think this year was shown online, so anybody could access it, which is great because you get a wider audience. So that's kind of where it started. We have subsequently traveled around, and the whole idea of the conference was that we would not just be academics, but also include practitioners. So these would be filmmakers, producers, sometimes archivists, historians, film writers, film critics, editors, and over the years. So that's Tan Chimui, the guys from the Asian Film Archive, that's Lav Diaz, that's, well, I guess you Indonesians would recognize him, that's Riri Riza.
Riza.
Yeah. And the conference would rotate throughout the region because, you know, it belongs to all of us in the region. So the idea is that whoever is located in the region, in that city, will organize it with some guidance and help from the central committee. So we were supposed to have our last one this year, this July, in Cebu City, but of course we got hit by COVID. And so we'll try and have it next year, but we'll see how things go. We are in the hands of fate.
But the call for papers already, the deadline for call for paper is already out. It's still
closed.
Extended,
yeah.
Not closed yet. Okay.
Yeah, because we already had a program. The program was done. And then, you know, we were all set. And then, of course, COVID happened. So we couldn't, the borders closed. And we just think it's a better idea to hold off. Yeah.
Hopefully we can go to Cebu because I heard like it's like a very beautiful place, right? It's like just like Bali. Is it, Patrick?
Well, it's hard to compare anything to Bali. So let's not let's
in Bali now.
Let's not make the comparison so that people will not feel so bad.
Thank you. Before I move to Patrick and Pak David, I just want to inform that the audience can drop a question or comments in the chat room if you are already in Zoom, or drop the comments and question in Binus Film YouTube channel, and I will deliver it to the speakers. Okay. Without further ado, please, probably Patrick, you can go. It's your turn now to.
Is it my turn or is it David first?
Pak David, do you want to present first? Is unmute? It's muted. Sorry.
You want me to present the PowerPoint now? That's your suggestion. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Well, here we go.
So hopefully after the two presentations we can have Q&A, so we have more time for the discussion with the audience.
Well, I'm bringing up the presentation now. Now, what I'm going to talk about now really arises from thinking I've been doing over quite a number of years. And my starting point does arise from reading the book, and in particular the last chapter there, the chapter by Sasani Huankao, the Bun Chu comedy series, pre-1990s, Thai localism and modernity. And what interested me about this was that she was presenting a kind of account of cultural priorities in some aspects of Thai film, and I think TV possibly, which seemed to have some relevance to thinking also about, well, some similarities to what you find in Indonesia, though not exactly the same by any means. And I will just go back and quickly outline here. She talks about the Bunchu comedy series, where the central character comes from a regional area, a rural area, from a village community. And the films present localism, rural localism, as an ideal for Thai people, in contrast to the corruption and the compromise that occurs when you enter the city, and also the loss of culture. Now, in Indonesia, the term culture is very, very popular. It's used a great deal. I think it's used less in Thailand, and it's used in a more general way. I'm not saying it isn't used at all, but it doesn't seem to me to be used in quite the same, with quite the same intensity. So she talks about Bunchu's innocence, generosity, and sincerity as seen as essential to a real Thai identity. She further suggests that the ideal rural community in this comedy series is collectivist. It's a group-oriented society, not individualistic. The orientation to the group and to the particular region is assisted by the fact that the central character doesn't use standard Thai, but a subdialect of central region Thai language, which bonds him more closely to a local area. And of course, Bunchu's identity is linked to Buddhist values as well. Now, it seemed to me that there were other relevant chapters in the book Southeast Asia on Screen, which I'm pleased to be able to inform Gaik that I've read all of it. Possibly the first person to do so apart from the authors, if I know what happens to my books. The three other chapters that seem to me to be taking a similar theme are the 1950s Filipino comics to film adaptations during the studio era by Joyce Ariola, and her key term is vernacular modernism. But I'd note also, having read that article, the importance of the matriarch producer, Donna Sisang, in this period, who I understand is the grandmother of Mike de Leon. Because here, can you imagine any other Southeast Asian country in which a woman of 61 could create possibly one of the largest studio companies in the country and run it for 20 years or more? What does this say culturally about the Philippines? Does it say something about the cultural difference of the Philippines? Or is this did it just happen accidentally? The second chapter, which seemed to me to be relevant, is A Nation Imagined Differently, the critical impulse of 1950s Indonesian cinema, where he talks about two Perfini-produced films, where Doug and Adrian talk about two films produced by the Usma Ismail's Perfini company, Tamu Agung, Exalted Guest, a film which was directed by Usma, but in fact was written by two people who, one of whom was actually couldn't return to Indonesia, being overseas in 1965, because he was regarded as a communist. The point here is, or rather, the key term here is enthusiastic appropriation of local traditions and culturally specific concepts. As the authors argue, at a time when everybody was trying to enter into the modern period. Right? So this is similar to what we find in argued in the Joyce Ariola article and in the article by Sasani Kwankau. And then finally, there's the article by myself and Gaston Suhardi, two auteurs in the Indonesian cinema of the 1970s and 1980s, Imanjaya and Teguh Karya. And I'm now going to go illustrate some of my arguments, both in that parts of that article, but also in other parts of my writings. And in particular, I want to raise certain concepts developed by Habermas in an article published in 1971 as a rejoinder to Marcuse, and it's called Technology and Science as Ideology. And he argues that you see that the development of capitalism, which he suggests begins at the beginning of the 19th century, as it grows, you find more and more that systems and subsystems of purposive rational action increasingly become the criteria of value. Social norms as indicators of values are replaced by technical rules. These are all his concepts and terms. Role internalization is replaced by the learning of skills and the obtaining of qualifications. Reciprocal expectations about behavior are replaced by conditional predictions and conditional imperatives. Intersubjectively shared ordinary language is replaced by contextual free language. This article is in a book called Towards a Rational Society, and it's not so very long, so if you're interested in this, you can follow up. Now, what I want to say is that in the work of Imanjaya and Benjamin S., these sorts of concepts are actually implicit within the films. In the chapter in Southeast Asia on Screen, which is, I think, well, it's an early chapter. In our chapter, we discussed the films Schumann made with the Batawi singer-comedian Benjamin S., born in 1939 and died 1995. And they are the three films, the two Seedel films and Pinangan. Pinangan is actually based on the Chekhov play, but completely transformed. Now, who are the Batawi? The Batawi are a resilient, if marginalised ethnic group in Jakarta, the descendants of slaves and servants brought by the Dutch to Batavia from early in the 16th century. They have their own culture, lifestyle, and dialect. So here this is the analogy with the case of the rural ties, except these are city-based people. Their highly reciprocal culture, as shown in Imanjaya's films and in three films, and in Benjamin's numerous B movies, Benjamin S., apart from being a brilliant singer, popular singer, starred in and partly wrote 46 B movies between 1971 and 79. The highly reciprocal Batawi culture, as seen in Schumann's films and Benjamin's B movies, still embodies characteristics of the pre-modern: reciprocity, intersubjectively shared language, social norms, and where social norms are not replaced by technical rules or systems of purposive rational action. In other words, that they have resisted the sorts of cultural changes that Habermas talks about are the result of capitalism. Here, if you don't know anything about Benjamin S., here is Benjamin singing a duet with Bing Slamet, who was another star who died, who was considerably older and who died just shortly after this in 1974. Benjamin is in the center. Now here we have Benjamin in a duet with Ida Riani. Benjamin sang with numerous women singers, but the most famous pairing that you have in his work are the other duets with Ida Riani, who also appeared in a few of his films. And some of these films are blatantly erotic in quite extraordinary ways, in ways that I've never heard in a non-Indonesian song that is as popular as this. And you can read about that in an article I did many years ago. I'll give the reference later. But these two, they improvised duets. And then these were standardized and issued, and they're remarkable duets. Now, then Benjamin, I now move from showing you images of Benjamin in his singing situation to a film. Intan Berduri, The Prickly Diamond, 1974. I just put this image up to show the identification of Ben with the Batawi. The Batawi is a relatively poor group within Indonesia, though that of course depends on the individual family. So here we have Ben's identification with the Batawi and the Jakarta poor. Now, what are the differences between the songs and the films? Well, I've looked at quite a lot of the films, and I've listened to most of the songs. In his Batawi songs, Benjamin presents an insider's view of a very reciprocal, if sometimes disrupted, Batawi society. In Ben's comedy films, and they're all really comedy films, the Batawi anti-hero is presented as a Batawi outsider seeking reciprocity in a changing and increasingly aloof, modernizing Jakarta society of the 1970s. So here we have the sort of cultural change that Habermas is talking about over a 150-year, 170-year period, manifested in B-movies made in the 1970s. Now, this is one of my last slides. Here we have Ben's satiric view of first world popular culture with, on the right, the takeoff of the 007 series, James Bond, with Benjamin Spion 025, and then on the left-hand side, Cowboy Nyungsi, the refugee cowboy, made a year later. I think I may have got the dates wrong, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, let's have a look. Now, Ben's use of popular non-Indonesian genres, because he doesn't always use popular non-Indonesian genres, but when he does, he really makes sure he does it properly. In these popular genres where icons of international popular culture, the cowboy, James Bond, are mocked and yet provide a vehicle of escape from the Indonesian context, basic assumptions and values of these macho genres are questioned and ridiculed, really. But in the gado-gado Western, which is a sort of mixed up Western, with from the analogy from the Indonesian food, Cowboy Nyungsi, not only is the Western satirized, but this story from the Wild West, in which Ben, the cowboy, is forced off his ranch, is being used to raise questions allegorically about the Indonesian context. In the mid-1970s, many small landholders in the Jakarta slums are being forced off their land at the behest of big business supported by the New Order government. So these are very rich works, and I just want to come back, now I'm almost finished, by talking about the correlation with Habermas, which is discussed at length in my article of 24,000 words published by the journal Indonesia in 2011. Now, in the pre-credit sequences of Refugee Cowboy, we find a critique of the transition to modernism, or to the modern. Now, I'm only going to present 2 or 3 points about this. There are about 10 pages on this in my article. Remember the point that Habermas makes: systems and subsystems of purposive rational action supporting capitalism increasingly become the main criteria of value. For example, Ben's farm is taken over by the sheriff, whose name is Sharif, and his offsiders in order to make way for a factory. So there we have, they have the argument that it's much more rational to get rid of a farm here. This is justified by the statement, we aim to build these factories in a joint venture, and you have a ranch in the Greenbelt, so we are forced to demolish it. Now here, quite specifically, another statement by Habermas applies. Intersubjectively shared ordinary language is replaced by context-free language. You've only got to mention a green belt and a factory and a joint venture, and you've got context-free language. And reciprocal expectations about behaviour are replaced by conditional predictions and conditional imperatives. The conditional prediction is, if you can't accept my ultimatum, and the conditional imperative is, you can confront the marshal in Bodong City. So there we have an example, a number of examples of what Habermas is talking about. I just want to end with one slide. This is a statement, a eulogy, that appeared just a week or so after Benjamin died at the age of about 56 in 1995. Bang Ben did us the service of lifting Batawi culture, which is egalitarian, into a national focus. Now, I was asking, in the article by Sassani, she's making arguments about Thai rural culture and its difference from modern city and the modern. I think I've probably demonstrated here that Batawi is a culture, or at least a lifestyle, which has very strong characteristics, which are related to collectivity, reciprocity, etc. What everybody said when Benjamin died was that this marginalized reciprocal culture of what certainly in the 30s, 40s, and 50s was a very poor group within the society, was brought into a national focus and became, to some extent, a kind of subject of national identification. That is, everybody knows what Benjamin is talking about. And in many ways, everybody has a part of themselves which subscribes to that. And possibly, you know, the fact that Benjamin's songs and films became so widely known and so popular partly led to the national obsession with using a Jakarta dialect as a way of speaking in ordinary situations. Okay, thank you. That's the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak David. It's very interesting. And I think you remind me of my childhood watching these Benjamin movies. Okay, and there is a term that I made me laugh, like please leave Bodong City or something like that. It's very, very funny if you know the context of Indonesia. Okay, no, it's Patrick turns, but before that, let me say hi to the participants, because there are so many participants. Okay, is it okay, Patrick? Yeah, just for say hi to our.
Okay, me. Okay, hello to everyone. I thought you were going to say that.
No, I mean, yeah, I want to say hi to the participants because we have so many.
203.
Yes, hello everybody.
Right now.
We have Adam Ni. Hello Adam. We have Alicia.
Oh wow, Adam.
Hello Alicia.
Hi.
Hello.
Are you in London or elsewhere?
In Malaysia.
In Malaysia. Hello Ben Murta, and then what else? We have so many.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, so many. We have 203 participants.
It's very early in England.
Yeah. Nafi Tofigian. Hello Nadi.
Oh, Nadi, hello.
I think it's Sweden. Are you in Sweden? And Nan Ahnas, hello, Mbak Nan. And then Pak Mundi. Hello, ada Olin. Hello Olin, and of course Paul. Hello Paul. Are you in Honolulu?
In Ratna.
Yeah. Well, how many? And Arnold up. So, hello. Are you in? I think you are in Leiden. And oh, so many. So, if anybody have any question or comments, please drop in the this chat room. Or if you are watching on the YouTube, please just drop comments and question as well. Okay, I will just Patrick. Just quick. I will read one of the from the note from Paul. Aloha everybody, great to be here. What a fantastic series. Thank you for hosting, Ekky, and thanks Gaik for mentioning our subtitling program. We have a major film translation project due to launch in early 2021. Wow. Stay tuned for more info on that as the launch approaches. So many subtitles, so little time. Okay, good luck, Paul. Okay, if anybody want to drop something, suggestion, or any other comments, please do it. Okay, Patrick, it's your turn now.
Okay, so I'll just share my screen for a while. Okay, so mine will be a little bit, can you hear me? Will be a little bit more informal. It really takes off from the title of the discussion and kind of thinking I've been doing lately about, well, rethinking Southeast Asian cinema studies. So I'd like to walk you along a path that I think most of us have taken when we began to find cinema in Southeast Asian cities. So this is a document, the movie poster for Nawapol's documentary, The Master. I think most of us have experienced like renting from bootlegged VHS shops. It's a common experience in Southeast Asian cities. And then, as Gaik was mentioning, by the late 90s to the early 2000s, I guess more or less all of us have gone through this phase of bootleg DVDs. So this is a common experience across Southeast Asia. But what I found really interesting lately is the proliferation of film festivals. There's really a lot of convergence and sharing, collaboration. In Manila, we have Tingin. I programmed this festival. It's been running for, well, it's supposed to be the 4th year now. We're not sure if we're going to have one this year. And we have Cinema Region, which is a local festival, sub-national regions. Recently, I attended also the Sea Shorts. This is a postcard from Sea Shorts, very beautiful. So we saw a lot of Southeast Asian films over there. And we are also familiar that in key places, not necessarily in the capital cities, but in suburban areas, in provinces, we have a lot of festivals, Southeast Asian film festivals being held. One that's really particularly successful so far is Luang Prabang Film Festival. In the Philippines, we have a lot. We have nearly, I think, more than 15. And an international one is Salamindanao International Film Festival. So I just also like to show you an image. So the one on the left is image from Luang Prabang. So it's a kind of, no, this is in Bali. So this is a kind of pop-up cinema in Bali. And the one below is in Mindanao, Nabi Filmex. And it's the same idea of like a pop-up cinema for alfresco style viewing. We also have across Southeast Asia a lot of micro cinemas. Dinosaurus, for example, in Indonesia, Cinema Centenario in the Philippines, although sadly Cinema Centenario sad to close because of the pandemic, but we still have a number across the Philippines. I just pointed this out to show how much what we're doing is sort of in sync. A lot of these things are done independently in many ways. There is, in a way, no discussion across platforms, but in another sense, there is a lot of collaboration as well when we find our films in, say, Sea Short, for example, or in Jogjakarta Film Festival, for example. And what I found thinking about this as a programmer, more as a programmer than as a researcher really, is apart from thinking about national cinemas, we're also really thinking about regional cinemas in a subnational formation, right? So, for example, the Ballad of Cinema Lovers, this is not like Indonesian cinema, right? I mean, this is Indonesian cinema on a very regional level. And Tupugay Matuy is from Mindanao as well. It was red tagged. It was harassed by the government. Comes from, I don't know, indigenous spaces. So, and if we survey Southeast Asian cinemas, we see a lot of these. In Sabah, we have filmmaking. In Makassar, we have filmmaking. And again, they're sort of independent, but they move almost in concerted pattern. And so this has led me to sort of reconceptualize the discussion instead of thinking in terms of national cinemas, which sort of homogenizes and flattens, and sort of also centered on the cities and the most productive areas of filmmaking. For example, in the Philippines, it's Manila, and then it's Jakarta, and then it's Bangkok, is to also shed light on the smaller filmmaking communities, the film cultures in subnational region. So I highlight this bit of this map. So my own work now is looking into nisology and island studies. So if we pay attention to a lot of the regional films outside of Manila that's happening, there's really a lot that resonates with, films just across some certain islands in the kind of archipelagic setting. And what I realized programming both a Southeast Asian film festival called Tingin, where I look into films from Malaysia and Burma and Thailand, and also co-organizing Cinema Region, which looks into the smaller filmmaking communities in the Philippines, that more or less the same kind of cultural labor, I think, is at work. I do a lot of translation. For instance, there's a lot of filmmaking that's happening in Mindanao and the Visayas. I don't know the languages. For much of what they say, I don't know a lot of the cultural aspects, and they are from the Philippines, right? So I exert the same kind of cultural translation when I co-program for a Philippine Film Festival and when I do so for a Southeast Asian Film Festival. And so I was thinking really along the lines of perhaps we can draw from nisology and think about films as kinds of islands. They have their own identities, but they exist in relation to other islands. We tend to think that the islands are the ones that are isolated, but in fact, all geographies are islands, right? So we're speaking only of big islands and small islands. And if we begin to think in this way, then perhaps we can also create sort of Southeast Asian cinema that is not like Indonesian and Thai, and but really more something that cuts across the region. So some of the assertions I'm making are as follows. So let me just read this. So film islands in my work in progress are premised on the vitality of place. So the very uniqueness and the dynamics of a place, but also place in relation to other places. Film islands recognize the tractability of mapping spaces, allowing networks to expand or contract into dynamic regions or regional cinema. So we can, for example, in the case of, I'm thinking of indigenous filmmaking, for example, we can really extend the notion of indigenous cinema beyond Southeast Asia, but at the same time, it completely resonate with Southeast Asian cinema still. So we have this way of expanding and contracting our mapping. Regional cinema, in this sense, not simply about the specificity of place, although it is about that as well, but also about the politics of place making, congregating. For example, who gets to create cinema, who gets to distribute these films, who gets to see them, etc., who gets to represent others or themselves. The alternative mapping of regional films offer the possibility of resistance that is inseparable from center, city, nation, globe. So in this sense, it cuts across these. It's sort of translocal, right? It has to deal with these bigger formations, but at the same time, it is of its own. Regional films also reactivate the radical potential of the margins that the proliferation of indie films have gained. Because in the past, we tend to really think of films from these, from the geographic margins and also the symbolic and social margins as peripheral. Indie has sort of gelled into, the more well-known indie by the bigger filmmakers, right? So if we sort of think of film islands, then we are able to harness the works of those in the periphery. Regional films also interrogate the constitution of national cinema, especially when they cut across nations or cross borders, which in the regions is pluralized as national cinemas. And finally, the production of margins emits the dominant narrative that sees locals in terms merely of multicultural identity and addresses a wider public about actual political, economic plights of the region. For example, why do certain regions suffer? Why are certain cinemas unable to cope? Why are certain films about certain topics? So, when I began thinking about these things, I found that I was able to see more and read more out of certain films, looking at films from East Timor, Timor-Leste, for example, and Sabah and Mindanao. Suddenly, they became legible in ways that were not legible, in ways that I could not read them while I was thinking of them as Malaysian and Philippine and Indonesian. So this is still in a kind of exploratory stage. My own take off, my own launch pad really is Philippine regional cinemas. But as I've mentioned, from a programming standpoint, I saw immediately how they're very similar. What I do when I look at certain films outside of the Philippines and in the Philippines are very similar. So there, this is kind of my contribution to the discussion of rethinking Southeast Asian cinemas. I think it's about time we think beyond the national framework. Even if we cannot get rid of it, for sure we will not want to get rid of it, but to think beyond them by conceptualizing new ways, really, of thinking about it. So that's it. That's it for my part.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Very interesting presentation, especially about the film island. It's very like archipelago and cinema. Okay, I think we have a few of questions in Zoom, but before that, I want to remind you, please, that the book now has a 40% discount, so until 15th of November, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. So it's your chance to get the book. If you use the C screen, the code C screen, and ordering online from via aup.nl. Okay. So it will only last until 15th of November. Okay. Thank you, Pak Irwanto. Okay, I will start to read the question from Lucia Yuen. Yeah, I think in Warwick. I'm new to Southeast Asian cinema. I know Southeast Asia has a lot of different languages and cultures. Usually one country filled with different races and different religions of people. Such as Malaysia, there are Malay, Chinese, India, etc. For movies made in this region in 1945 to 1998, how do market their film? Is the movie usually made and screened in local languages, or they will add subtitles, or dub in Chinese for cinema that usually Chinese go, dub in Malay for cinema that Malay go, and for movie that made in Indonesia, how do a film usually circular in Southeast Asia for different race of people, or usually Southeast Asian can master few languages, so watching movie in their second or third languages usually isn't an issue. Okay. Want to probably Gaik, yeah, because first is she asked about the Malaysian cinema.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. There's actually a Singaporean academic doing her PhD in Oxford, I think, Yo Min Hui. So she's looking at, these are, I think, Cathay films, Cathay cinema films, and they made, what they would do is they would make the same film. So in Indonesia, you know, if Benjamin S had a James Bond ripoff, the Malaysian one also had one. And what happened was they basically have the same company, which is I can't remember if it was the Shaw Brothers. I'm so sorry. I always get these two studios mixed up. But they basically shot a Chinese version, and then they shot the Malay version. But everything, even the set, is the same. So, you know, they would shoot the let's say the Chinese version, and then it would be the same actress, but with a Malay male hero, and they would just put him in, and they would shoot the same scene but in Malay, or you know, dub. So in that way, they knew how to market it based on language. But I would say, yeah, but you know, those studios were already kind of Chinese studios in the first place, who were making films in Malaya, and at that point, the bigger audience would be Malay, and so they were making films in Malay. But they also had a second revenue stream, which was to make films in Mandarin or Cantonese, and those films would circulate in a broader way throughout Far East Asia as well as Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Is it true that if the language is not Malay, the film can be considered as international film instead of Malaysian film? Is it true? So they have this different treatment for example, tax or something.
I think it depends on when you're talking. So after FINAS was formed in '83, and especially in a more recent period, yes, I'm not so sure about before that. I know before that there were lots of kind of wars around imports and stuff like that, because it was cheaper to buy films and just bring them in, because you knew that the quality was better, so they were going to make money back. Whereas the local films at that time, I mean, looking at after the Singapore studios closed down with the separation of Malaysia, and with Singapore got out of Malaysia, was kicked out. After '65, when the studio moved to KL, to Kuala Lumpur, the quality was not so good because the infrastructure wasn't there, etc. So eventually it suffered, and it was sort of in the doldrums in the '70s, and then maybe in the '80s there started to be a revival. But the '70s, there was also a lot of competition from Indonesian films, and Indonesian films were of a better quality. So I think Malaysians were very familiar with Indonesian artists at that point. And then of course there was the war of the Ganyang Malaysia, because Indonesia was not happy with the formation of Malaysia in 1963. So then there was the not allowing Indonesian films to come in. Constantly there was this sort of battle between Malaysia and Indonesia. But I have to say too, to kind of reference what Patrick was saying earlier, there were also co-productions between Malaysia and Singapore. And to follow up with Patrick's paper, one of my students who's actually just finished and is about to submit his revised PhD dissertation, Irman Maharam, his PhD is on film Nusantara. So looking again, breaking down this whole idea of how we think about Southeast Asian cinemas as a collection or a conglomeration of national film industries, and looking more at deconstructing them and thinking about the stuff that they share in between, maybe through water, through this notion of tanah air, through land and water, and reading some films through these sort of metaphors. This notion of Nusantara as the island in between, right? So film
right,
island.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
May I add something, Ekky, about this market? I think it's really one of those research questions that we need to pursue across like national lines, right? Because I'm sure there is a lot of material out there we haven't explored. For instance, some of the films between 45, like from the 50s to the 60s, that have arrived in the Philippines already quite late, maybe the 90s. They're dubbed in English. Like for example, P. Ramlee films in VCD, for example, will be in English. But I've seen some of our movie posters with Indonesian titles, for example. And so we know that we have also been distributing some Philippine films in Indonesia, but I'm not certain. Well, I'm almost sure they're dubbed in Indonesian, but I mean, I don't know really what happens in this like crossing of lines. So I think there's really more to be done in this area. That Southeast Asians can collaborate because the language part is really crucial. Then of course there's also the B movies, right? So there are the international B movies that are really meant to be distributed across more than one country in Southeast Asia or even beyond Southeast Asia, and they're in English, sometimes in odd like sort of dubbed off sync English. I don't know if they ever appear in local languages dubbed, but the ones that get to the Philippines, for example, are always in English. So but that's another thing, because in the Philippines we speak in English. I mean, no, it's a normal thing to find movies in English. It's not as normal to find things dubbed into the local language in the cinema. So I'm not so certain if they are dubbed when they get to the other places. So this question really opens up a lot of possibilities for research.
Thank you, Patrick. And if anybody wants to know about the connection between Indonesia and Philippines in terms of B movies, just read what Thomas and I wrote in this edited collection. It's about the exploitation cinema in the 70s to 80s. Okay, thank you. Pak David, do you want to answer the questions regarding the Indonesian cinema and the language? Or
well, that's very well. The simple thing about Indonesia is that there is a national language and people learn it at school. So although many people in different parts of Indonesia use a local language, they use a national language as well. And so you have two languages for a lot of people. But that, of course, doesn't explain how you might make an Indonesian film communicate in the Philippines or in Thailand, but it does explain how the film can be followed in Malaysia. I think that's the only point I want to make, except that I think Indonesian filmmakers like Garin, for example, at times like to have parts of their films in a local language, if possible. And this is seen as a kind of ideal. But how constantly this can be realized is, of course, both an economic and it's primarily an economic problem. That's all I have to say about it.
okay, thank you very much, Pak David. Okay, move to next question from Matthew. Good morning, sir, madam. I would like to ask two questions. The first one, what are the key points to make Southeast Asian cinema keep moving forward and acknowledged by international audience? Or probably global cinema discourses. And the second question, is it possible we get more higher audience than, I mean, the local ones than the Hollywood one, higher audience? Okay, who wants to ask? I want to answer.
I'd say sure. You can see that already if you just look at the stuff that Netflix takes to put up on Netflix, because Netflix knows that Malaysians don't watch Malaysian films on Netflix. So I don't know about whether Indonesians watch Indonesian films on Netflix or whether you go to Netflix to watch something else. But obviously Netflix will pick stuff that they think that the other people in the region will watch. And you can kind of look at the types of films that they pick. So I think in terms of genres, they know what kinds of genres are global, will have a global demand. So let's say like Thai horror or maybe Indonesian horror, like any kind of horror they know will sell, no matter how good or bad in some ways. Progressively also action films, and this is what Thomas is kind of working on, is action films, these sort of martial arts genres that will include fighters from, MMA fighters or whatever, mixing Thai, Indonesian, Malay, mixing different forms of martial arts. Those will sell, and you already have a few good examples. I think the harder things to sell are the kind of more experimental films and the slow films, but they have a different audience. They have film festival. Those are film festival audiences. So it depends. I think some are already well known and out there. I think the thing to do is to just make high quality films with, in a way, we're back to kind of very simple, basic things that we expect from Hollywood films or non-Hollywood films. Building strong characters, building something that's not formulaic and not too culturally entrenched. And you kind of see that as well. Some films are made which are not very culturally specific, and to try to appeal to a wider audience. But then at the same time, they lose their cultural specificity, and you wonder, well, how is this film Malaysian, or how is this film Indonesian? But genre is the way to go, I think.
Okay. Thank you. We have so many questions here, so and some of them are the same, so it's redundant. So I just skip. Okay.
Can I make a point there?
Okay. Go ahead. David.
Look, I just want to take up the point that there was a report in the Indonesian weekly, Campos, in late August, that a new Indonesian film, jointly produced by Dian Sastrowidoyo and Shanti Pine, called Crazy Awesome Feature, Guru Golik, directed by a woman, in fact, was released by Netflix reportedly in 190 countries in 17 languages. So that may be a partial answer to the question about how films are able to communicate. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak David. Okay, next from Said Altaf Babud. 2 questions. Which one is better for young filmmakers, going to Hollywood or staying in their country and develop the film industry there? Probably like itu ya, like apa namanya, the Conjuring producer or director from Malaysia. He went to Hollywood and something like that. And then, what are the important factors hampering the development of the film industry in Southeast Asia? Okay, probably Patrick.
Yeah, okay. The first one's quite tricky. I mean, the filmmaker just decides, I guess. But I mean, my inclination is, of course, stay, right? But I mean, the filmmaker sort of decides. But the second one, I find more interesting, the question of what are the important factors hampering the development. In one sense, as I've mentioned in the beginning, the industries are really growing. in a way, we've seen so much growth in many places when we compare it to just some like maybe 20, 30 years ago. There's really so much growth. In fact, in a way, there's a glut in that we have so many films. For example, in the Philippines, or I can imagine many other places where so many films are produced and yet not many of them are seen by a lot because in a way we overproduce the films. At least that's true in the Philippines. We have maybe a little less than 10 big film festivals or nearly 20 small film festivals across the Philippines. We have like a lot of independent productions, varying levels of independence, like small productions and big ones. So I think there are two key areas that need to be looked at. The first one really is what do we do with all these productions? There's really a need to kind of rethink the aspect of distribution and exhibition, which I think has not kept up with the growth in production. There are so many young people who want to be filmmakers, but I mean, what happens after, to your film after? So the distribution part is really very important. It's not seen enough attention by stakeholders, I think. And the other one, especially in countries with smaller cinemas, I've mentioned, is there's really a lot of censorship. We're sort of lucky in the Philippines that despite repression, as Gaik was mentioning, despite or exactly because of repression, Filipino filmmakers have made a lot of these bold films, and I think also this because we have this tradition. In a way, we are sort of empowered to keep doing it. We have a lot of filmmakers to look up to and look back to, and remember we've done it. But when we look at other places where censorship is so deeply entrenched, right? I mean, maybe what comes to mind is Laos, for example, where they can't, for example, the official party line does not allow them to make films about spirits because there is no spirit world in communist Laos. So how can you make a horror film in this place, right? So of course, some people have circumvented this and have tried to find ways to make it. But I mean, these kinds of deeply entrenched forms of censorship really hinders, I think, a lot of the places. So I think those two are very important. Distribution, which means once you've made your films, where do you bring them? How will you market them? Who can see them? And the other one is censorship.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick. We have about 10 minutes left, so I will be quick. Okay. From Mas Dr. Anton Sutandio, Universitas Kristen Maranatha. Question for speakers. What do you think is the future trajectory of Southeast Asian cinema based on your findings and research on local or regional kind of cinema all around Southeast Asia? Can we still call it Southeast Asian cinema, or will it transform or merge or split into different kind of cinema? This is interesting. Okay. Who wants to?
Well, let me. I just want to also say how surprised I was when Gaik mentioned that one of her students has just finished writing almost similar kind of conceptualization that I was doing. It really says a lot about the direction of Southeast Asian cinemas. And I guess this is what's exciting about it. It's because since it's not clearly anything, right? It's sort of kind of terra incognita, right? I mean, it can shape up into anything at this point, and so it's exciting in that way. One, I think there is, just to answer directly what Anton was saying, is that I think all these more general and larger formations will stay on Southeast Asian cinema, Philippine cinema, Indonesian cinema. In a way, they're by default our ways to identify films. So they will stay on. But I think we're at the point, at least in scholarship, of the ones that I know doing scholarship, doing research in Southeast Asian cinema, is they're the almost the immediate starting point is to problematize these very homogeneous ideas. I think it's true of most of the Southeast Asian scholars I know. The starting point is is to acknowledge it, but also to sort of question it. So we're not very much keen, I think, of trying to pick up from already existing frameworks, like what is the national cinema, or because we already know in a way it's a kind of post-colonial project to look into it from some other angle, and also in relation to the fact that we are producing so many films of like hybrid films, all kinds of collaborations and co-production. So it's almost impossible to begin where everyone else began, with national cinema, right? So we're also almost beginning somewhere in the middle with regard to this. So it will stay, but I feel it will be exciting because each new researcher carries with him or her a new idea to bring into the table or onto the table.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So I move on. Do you want to add something?
No, it's okay. Just move on. A bit for me.
Okay, Pak David, do you want something to add?
A couple of remarks about the concept of national cinema. In Indonesia, the notion of a national cinema became important in the 1950s because the nation had just been created. There hadn't been a nation before. There'd been the Netherlands, East Indies. In Australia, it's quite different. We had a nation, a sort of nation. I mean, it was part of the Commonwealth of Nations, British Commonwealth of Nations, but we didn't have a cinema. So when we got a cinema, the notion of national cinema was attached to getting a cinema, not attached to getting a nation. These are quite different. You can see that the notion of national cinema really is a disparate notion in which there are, to use Wittgenstein's term, family resemblances, but they're often significantly different, and you can't just attach the stereotype term national cinema all the time. And in, for example, my book, Cultural Specificity in Indonesian Film, chapter 4 is on regionalism and films made in regional areas. Of course, this goes back to the 1950s, so the concept of region is a little bit different from that Patrick is using. So you could say that regionalism is also a term built out a number of related terms which have family resemblances as well. So I'll just leave it at that. I think I'll leave it there. Okay. Right.
Thank you, Pak David. Okay, we still have like 5 more minutes, probably 2 more questions. Yeah. From Felicia Lanska, I would like to ask how Asian cinema in that period influenced movie style this day in Malay and Philippines. Thank you. How Southeast Asian cinema produced in that period influenced recent movies in
so I think I mentioned earlier, right, in the book, so from the 50s, from the 40s to the 90s, I think I already mentioned, so for example, people like Lino Broca, a Filipino auteur, Filipino filmmaker, his work was political, and he had fans, and then you have younger filmmakers who tried to follow his footsteps in, not making the film in the exact same way, but definitely interested in history and where Philippines stand, and having to look back upon history. So you have filmmakers like Raya Martin, Lav Diaz, who do that. I think that you can see that in other places as well. In Malaysia, it's harder to say that because there's, people go around and they say there's never going to be another P. Ramlee. But in the book, we don't actually talk about P. Ramlee. I think we talk about Hussein Hanif, who's kind of another auteur who's always compared to P. Ramlee, but people don't talk about his work so much. And I think he's sort of overshadowed, and it's high time that we look at his work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gaik. And probably the last question. I think there are similar questions regarding global competition. For example, if we have the capability to compete with Hollywood, do you think we can tell the Southeast Asian cinema well as much as they do? And is there are similar question like that? For example, in your opinion, how can Southeast Asian films? Oh, this is different. How can Southeast Asian film studies compete with foreign films such as American, Europe, and others in that popular? So it's like two different questions. First of all, it's about the global competition of Southeast Asian cinema, and the second one is about the Southeast Asian cinema studies as a field of study in the field of film studies or the scholarly works.
I'd like to say, I mean, to give an answer that connects both. In the Philippines, in the area of film production, in the film industry, there are attempts to make relatively bigger films for export, genre films that would be palatable to audiences beyond the Philippines. And you could say to a certain degree that you could compare it to Hollywood, although still quite far from it. But in film studies, a very strong sense of not trying to be Hollywood is there, right? So I think, in fact, the Philippine film studies was established precisely to think outside of the binary between Philippine cinema and Hollywood. And this kind of strain or this kind of factor in doing Philippine film studies remains. And so, I think that's really special. This kind of tension between the industry trajectory of wanting to be export quality for a global audience, and Philippine film studies that tries to think cinema outside exactly of these industrial boxes, right? Like trying to be Hollywood. I mean, when Philippine film studies was more or less emergent in the 70s, that's one of the main assumptions of the critic Bienvenido Lombera. He said we should stop comparing Philippine cinema to Hollywood. Otherwise, we will never be able to talk about Philippine cinema. All right, and to that extent that it is true, it is still true today that many scholars who do Philippine film studies or even Southeast Asian film studies will not begin with the premise of going Hollywood. So I think those two questions in a way are in tension, right?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry I cannot read all the questions because we are running out of time. We still have 1 minute, so I will ask the speakers to do like a closing statement, like a short one related to Southeast Asian cinema, starting with Gaik.
Okay. I just want to highlight a few things that we didn't get a chance to talk about. I think what Patrick showed is very interesting, and there is a kind of certain direction to try to take Southeast Asian national cinemas as the de facto, and then kind of go beyond that or go within it, like cinema region, like regional cinema. But at the same time, there's also people kind of looking at diasporic filmmakers, co-productions. What happens when these studios are in China or Hong Kong, and then they're making films here? What about people who are from Southeast Asia who go to make films somewhere else? What do those films look like? What do they tell us about what's under behind all that? But the other thing I wanted to say that we didn't get to say is that there are journals that Southeast Asian cinema and the discourse is out there through through Plaridel, and Patrick is the editor, and Plaridel comes out of University of the Philippines. There's also another regional journal that's based out of Yonsei University, and it's called Situations. So they also accept articles on film, Southeast Asian film. There are other ones that we can look for. Also Nang, N-A-N-G, which is a film magazine. So I would say, you know, if you're a film scholar, to look at those places, to also think about submitting your work to those journals.
Thank you. Okay, Pak David.
Yes, I've got 2 points to make. The first is about scholarship of Indonesian film history and its relationship to film history and film theory internationally. One thing is, if you take the films by Usma Ismail, or the films made by his Perfini company, some of which he directed, but particularly the ones made in the first 4 years of independence, these are reputedly have been influenced by Italian neorealism. Now, early scholars, particularly international scholars, who came from politics and anthropology and sociology rather than from film studies, often dared to make remarks about how these directors could have been influenced by Italian neorealism. And often they say, well, they probably weren't because there's no written evidence. Usma Ismail never makes any remark about an Italian neorealist film, for example, is one of the points made. In fact, if these people really understood filmmakers and filmmaking, they would have been aware that it was highly likely that Indonesian filmmakers in the late 40s and early 1950s would have been agog at the idea of what the Italian neorealists had actually done, and that their circumstances were very similar to the circumstances in which the Italian neorealists working at the end of the war in Italy, and that they would have to make films that, although they may never have seen an Italian neorealist film, these films are influenced by the mode of production, though not necessarily the style of any particular Italian neorealist film. In fact, when you look carefully at these films made in the 1950s, and most of these people, there's some evidence in their writings that they haven't even seen the films, and they're relying on not even screenplays, because screenplays didn't exist, but treatments that in fact they really don't know very much either about Italian neorealism or the films that they're saying can't be influenced by Italian neorealism. In fact, the early Perfini films about the War of Independence and the struggle for independence, they do adopt a similar mode of production to the Italian films. And these are, for example, shooting on location, using non-actors, using low levels of technology. So you have reflector screens rather than lighting, and you improvise a lot, both when writing the screenplay the night before and on location. Now, in that way, these films clearly are similar to Italian neorealists, but they do something that is not done in any Italian neorealist film, which is that in two of the Usma films, The Long March and After the Curfew, central characters are shown, or important characters in the film who are freedom fighters, are shown as committing human rights abuses against their own population. And this is something that Rossellini, Visconti, and De Sica never did, nor any of the other lesser Italian neorealist directors. So in fact, there are aspects of Indonesian film, possibly other parts of Southeast Asian film, which provide a very striking and interesting comparison and point of reference against major film movements internationally. So that's just one point. You can bring it into the international sphere. The second point I quickly wish to make is that with regard to the future of writing about film in Southeast Asia, I myself, together with Doi del Mondo in the Philippines and Adam Nee, are doing an update of this book that I edited in 2000 2001 for the Vietnam Film Institute. And this update, which may take, as Gaik would understand, quite a while to do and get together, particularly when you must cover every country, that's being supported by the Thai Film Archive. And in fact, they're quite generous in what they've done. So that's just another development in film studies of Southeast Asia. Thank you for your attention and a very interesting session.
Thank you, David. And last but not least, please, Patrick.
Yeah, so I'm reading some of the questions, and I think the sentiment when we begin from a local perspective is quite similar. There's a lot of discontent. I think there's a lot of feeling that we can go bigger, we can go more international, we can be more known, and the discontent is great. I think it keeps us on our toes. But at the same time, if we look at it from another perspective, I myself was surprised about the tone I took as I was sharing my presentation, that it's actually quite positive. I see that the field is quite protean. Anything can happen. A lot from I guess if we look at it from an economic sort of Hollywood comparison standpoint, then it's really bleak. But if we look at it from a cultural, even a political standpoint and aesthetics, there's really so much happening, and we really can look forward to a lot of things, I think. And so it takes a lot of, I think, what we've been doing with ASEAC, for example, or discussions like this, is we need a lot of these things, right? To first to be able to talk about our cinema, to talk about what our filmmakers are doing, and bring it forward. So yeah, I think just my parting shot is there's really a lot of great things happening. I mean, the questions don't say that a lot, but you don't really feel it coming from a local perspective. But there's really so much to look forward to.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, and that's all. Thank you for everybody. Thank you Gaik, thank you Batawi, thank you Patrick, thank you all the audience in Zoom and YouTube. Everybody who is watching now, and don't forget to stay tuned, because we at Binus Film School we will have another regular academic series with other topics, and stay healthy and stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, Ekky, for inviting
and
us.
for Binusian students, please SAT points QR code. Please, the Pak Irwanto will type something. Don't forget. Yeah, please for Binus students to scan this code. Okay, thank you, and I hope we can see you all in the Cebu or virtual. I don't know. And don't forget, apa namanya, the 40% discount still happens until 15th of November, and I think there is somebody from
that's our editor. That's our editor publisher. So you can contact Saskia if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you everybody, and see you next time. Bye bye. Stay healthy. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. Subscribe, like, and share the YouTube channel Binus Film. Okay, thank you.
Sabar dulu satu pagi. Sabar dulu
Pak Ekky ada yang minta di share barcode ya lagi untuk SAT point.
Oh bentar.
Ya. Sebelum.
Bentar Pak Ekky.